Hey guys, Alex with Excel in You. If you're working with numbers, you need to know the sum, average, and count functions. Hey guys, let's go over how to use sum, average, and count today. Now, these are pretty widely used and they're pretty common to see. There's several different ways we can combine them and use them, but let's look at the differences from other basic formulas that we could put together. Sum is one of the most commonly used, and there's several different ways that we can use the sum formula. A lot of times we can use one cell plus another. Simple math. We can do equals this cell plus this cell, and we get one number. If either of those cells changes, this number will change. That's great. But we don't want to repeat that 100 times for 100 different cells. So we can use the sum formula, which is equals sum, open parentheses. Then we can choose our range. Now, even if you have a header, oftentimes you can use an entire column because it'll usually only count the numbers. So if I use the entire K column, it's going to count up the numbers. Now, just for comparison, we can do equals sum and look at only the numbers by themselves and see if they're the same. There we go. The difference is, you'll notice our second bar here is not going to change if I add any new numbers, where the first one does because it encompassed the entire column. So sum has the benefit of using new information as it's added, especially when you use an entire column or an entire row as your running total. Now, this will take into account basic math, which means if you have a percentage in here, if you have decimal points in here, if you have negative values in here, then that will show. So let's say units sold is actually a return of 5 units. So we change this to -5. And now we'll see that the -5 is part of our sum in this running total. The next one is average. Average is a great way to get an average of totals for units sold and just an average number of items in general. So average is taking the total of volume or the total amount of the numbers and dividing it by the number of numbers. So if the total of these numbers is 1,000,000 and there's 100 of these numbers, we do 1,000,000 divided by 100. Well, the average formula just does all of that for us. We use equals average and we select our range. Now, you'll notice that I put my average formula underneath the column. That means if I want to add to this, I'm going to have to move my formula. If this is a static number of cells that are being used and no more are going to be used, I don't need to move this cell. Vice versa, if I want this to be at the bottom at all times and I still need to add data, I would do that by inserting new rows. So I might go here, and I might go insert. And I can just keep inserting as many rows as I need to, and this will always stay at the bottom and continue to average. Count allows us to count up how many of something there are. Now, in a lot of cases, count by itself is not the most useful. We're going to go over some of the if versions of these formulas as well in just a moment. Next, let's look at count. Count is going to give us the total number of something that exists. Now, sometimes count doesn't work when there are variable different types of that thing within your cells. So different states, California versus Texas versus New York, it might have a difficult time counting because it might not be sure what you're trying to count. If everything is the same, like numbers, well, it's going to count how many numbers there are. It's not going to add them up or average them or do any math to them. It's just going to count how many of them there are. This can be useful when you have multiple different charts running simultaneously. Sometimes you can use the numbers on the left side for the rows, and that can give you a quick count of how many there are of something. Sometimes you want to put count in a different page on a different sheet or in a different column and maintain a running number from a different column. For example, I can put count over here equals count, and then I can select my range. $27. Now if I want to make this a running total, I can always go back into this, select my range. Let's change it to the entire column. Still get 27 because it's not counting units sold. It's a different type of information within the cell. It's not a number, it's letters. And then as I add new numbers to this, my count goes up. Let's look at more specific variables here. Let's look at COUNTIF, SUMIF, and we can probably even do AVERAGEIF. And let's look at how those work. Well, I already have this set up for COUNTIF. Let's count if the column contains California. So we use equals COUNTIF. We can select the entire column because again we want a running total. Then our criteria is the letters CA. So we always use quotation marks when we're referring to specific letters. I can choose to close the parentheses or I don't have to. Excel knows we're at the end of a formula, so if I hit enter, it will automatically be there. We have 9 references of California. This can tell us that we've sold to California 9 times. Now we can layer this, and we'll talk about layered formulas in the future, where let's say I have dates in association with this. I can say, how often have I sold in California before this date or after this date? Then we can even use pivot tables, which again we'll go over in another course. That can give us more detailed information even faster. Pretty cool tool. That's how we use COUNTIF. SUMIF works very similarly, but with one added component. I select my range. I select my criteria. We're still looking at states. We're still looking at California. But now I can choose to sum up a specific column or specific set of data. So if I want total number of units sold in California, I could use units sold. If I want total profit from California, then I would use the total profit column. In this case, we're looking at total profit. So I collect total profit, close that parenthesis, and hit enter. And once again, as long as this row is added into, then any new numbers I add will be added up in our COUNTIF and SUMIF formulas. AVERAGEIF is going to work the same way. So let's do average units for California, and let's use equals AVERAGEIF. Again, we're going to select our range. Our criteria is again California, and now we want to use units sold. And there we go. Now we can play around with this. We can make sure that this is formatted as a number with only 2 decimal points, right? We can go into this and we can go to Format Cell, and we can choose even more specific elements of how many decimal places we want. If the thousands number is going to be separated by a comma, changes into currency, anything that we need to do. So this is how we can use sum, count, and average to our advantage, especially with running totals. And again, as we add in more detailed information into forms like this, into charts like this, we have other tools that we can use to our disposal, including layered formulas and pivot tables, which we'll come back around to. Get your free one-on-one strategy session scheduled through our Skool platform in the comments below.